Hello and welcome. We're on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference, and our guest today is the Prime Minister of Norway, Jonas Gahr Støre. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
2 years of war in Ukraine, and according to the intelligence service of Norway, it seems that Russia is gaining the upper hand. Do you agree with what your intelligence services are saying about the status of the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think the main picture is that there's a stalemate on the battleground, an extraordinarily long battleground, and that not much has happened in terms of back and forth. Still, there is a devastating war going on, people being killed at that battlefield, and also civilian Ukrainians waking up to air alarms in small and big cities, infrastructure being destroyed. So there's a high-intensity war going on 2 dimensions. So I think, this is a question still of defending Ukraine's right to defend itself. It is standing up to a president in Russia that is very clear that he believes Ukraine has no right to exist as a state. It's an artificial state. And Ukrainians disagree. They are putting up a fight, and they are willing to do so, and we should support them.
But it seems that they're not winning that fight. I mean, this report by the intelligence service says Russia is getting weapons from North Korea, from China. It's producing more weapons. It's getting more troops on the battlefield, and it seems that they're winning. We saw the Ukrainian retreat from the town of Avdiivka. It might be a symbol, but it might also be a pattern.
It should be a wake-up call to make the Ukrainians fit and able to defend themselves. If you think about 2 years ago, as you said, a few weeks after that invasion, there was Russia all over the place. They were, heading for Kiev, taking the government. So in that sense, Ukraine was able to push back. And then, there are different discussions on this counteroffensive last year. But I think on the battlefield, it seems that it's very much a stalemate. But we need to, support Ukraine because they are up against a country that is pouring in men, accepting that men are killed by the tens of thousands, and also providing weapons from North Korea, Iran, and elsewhere. And it's a stark reminder to us that we have to support Ukraine.
So, speaking of supporting Ukraine, Ukraine has a bilateral security agreements with the United Kingdom, with Germany, with France. This begs the question, will Norway also sign such a deal with Ukraine in the near future? You said it's a wake-up call, we need to act quickly. Will you do so?
Well, in all modesty, I think Norway has acted very early on this. Last year we went to Parliament and say, we want to pledge a 5-year plan of support to Ukraine. €1.5 billion every year. If you look at the different tables coming out, we are high on that table per capita and per GDP of Norwegian contribution. So that's a 5-year pledge to Ukraine, €1.5 billion per year in 5 years, goes about 50-50 to military aid and economic humanitarian aid. Now we will also make such an agreement with Ukraine based on this aid, I would say, and all the Nordic countries are doing the same. It started back in Vilnius at the NATO summit last year, where the G7 countries agreed to make these agreements. I mean, they can provide more hardcore security than smaller countries can, but we should also, I think, formalize our support in a political agreement with Ukraine.
Right. The Ukrainians keep on asking for weapons, especially long-range missiles. On the other hand, some in the West are worried to see more and more strikes in Russia, on Russian soil. Do you think Ukraine should get those long-range missiles, even if they use it against Russian territory?
Well, I think we're all, served by not seeing an escalation of this war. This is not a war against NATO. I think that would be irresponsible to move it in that direction. I will, be cautious commenting on exactly where Ukraine is responding. I mean, what is clear is that Ukraine is the object of massive attacks from Russia. With missiles, with drones, with missiles launched by air, by ship, and so on. This is not what Norway can contribute. Where Norway has been important is in the air defense. And we produce in Norway the NASAM system. So alongside Patriots and Iris, the German system, we have contributed to protecting Ukrainian cities. And that's a very important contribution, and we will do everything we can to continue that support.
One of the consequences of the war in Ukraine has been that Sweden and Finland joining NATO, right? This has also prompted some recent statements by senior defense officials from Scandinavian countries about the threat of a war between their countries and Russia. Is this something that Norway is fearing, that there could be a war with Russia in the near future?
Well, let me put it this way. I don't think it is in Russia's interest to engage war with a NATO country. So that's I think is the base thing. Secondly, we don't observe in terms of our near abroad that there's an opportunity or a possibility of that in the near future.
You don't see more troops in the Arctic and so on?
To the contrary, basically, because Russia has been sending a lot of troops to Ukraine and taking high casualties. But the point here is that when you have a neighbor that launches a full-scale war on another neighbor, although we are in a different part of Europe, we have to take measures, such as Sweden and Finland saying, we too want that collective security of NATO, as we've had for 75 years. But I tell Norwegians, that we don't think they should fear a war tomorrow. Again, I don't think that will be in the Russian calculus. But being part of NATO, being part of a collective security, we need to strengthen our capacity.
Right. I just want to go back to this point. I mean, the Danish defense minister said a few days ago that there's a possibility of war within 3 to 5 years, saying that there was new information that NATO countries didn't have before that has now surfaced. Is there such new indications that could explain these kinds of commentaries about a forthcoming war with Russia?
We don't see that there's a forthcoming war with Russia coming up. But again, Russia developing authoritarian regime, militarizing their economy, investing heavily in rearming their country, and engaging this war in Ukraine. If you are a neighbor, you have to take your precautions. That's the point. Right. And that we do, and we do it as Norway, and we do it alongside our neighbors. Then the debate on this is a bit different from country to country. I mean, think about Sweden. They've been neutral, and they've been outside the alliance for 200 years. Finland has a very special story, where it lies. And Norway, we have our story. So that's the good thing about NATO. We come together and we pool our histories, and together we become stronger as an alliance.
You mentioned Finland. They closed the border with Russia. Is this still a possibility for Norway?
I have made every preparation to be able to do that on very short notice. But the one gate we have open is still open, and we monitor it closely.
I want to get to the other war that's raging and attracting a lot of attention, obviously. In Gaza, Norway has been historically involved in trying to find a compromise between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Do you see any hope on the horizon, Mr. Prime Minister?
It's very hard to be hopeful when you see what's happening now. The terrible attack that surprised and traumatized Israel on the 7th of October, hideous terrorist attack against civilians, innocent people. Israel's response, which we believe has gone too far in terms of its the requirements of proportionality, international humanitarian law.
It's breaking in international law.
Well, 2 million people are now basically uprooted inside that small enclave of Gaza, and one thing is to be killed from heavy bombardment in urban areas, but you have also now got food shortage, water shortage, disease, very, very serious situation. So it's not easy to be hopeful, but we try to do everything we can with our contacts. One, to get humanitarian aid in, get hostages out, and to get the process going of what will be the day after. Then there is the West Bank, also very, very vulnerable, a lot of people being killed, settlers being armed, very unstable situation, and the Palestinian Authority, which is very vulnerable. And then you have the northern border between Israel and Lebanon, where there's also high tension. So I think everybody, be it France, be it Norway, with contacts in the region, should do what it can to seek for solutions.
I mean, could a recognition of a Palestinian state by more Western countries, let's say even the United States, do you think this is just a symbolic gesture, or do you think that this could maybe help make some progress, maybe by involving other Arab countries that are not willing to really take on the issue given the situation?
It is symbolic, but more than that. I mean, that would be a major development if that happened, and Norway stands ready to recognize a Palestinian state. It's in our platform, but we want to do it at the right moment. You know, we want to do
Isn't now the right moment?
No, I think now you have great divisions among Palestinians. You don't have a clarity of who is in charge where. So part of this process now has to be to envisage a two-state solution and to do work with the neighbors in the region, with the US, with all the key partners to see what that may look like. I know Israel is against it. It's a complicated matter. But then we also have to contribute to Palestinian unity because it's such a division among Palestinians. But I think Palestinians should know that countries stand ready to recognize a Palestinian state, and Norway, I think, will be ready to do that at the right moment.
Last question. Norway has decided to continue funding the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, UNRWA, that's taking care of Palestinian refugees. Many other Western countries have decided to halt after accusations that some UNRWA members were involved in the October 7 attacks. Why did you take that position?
Well, first of all, we believe that closing down the whole of UNRWA, because there is suspicion against a number of UNRWA staff having, sided with Hamas, participated in the 7 October atrocities, that amounts also almost to collective punishment. We support that there is an investigation by the UN and by UNRWA to find out, what is the scope of this. But the second part is that UNRWA is there and playing a fundamental role for the daily livelihood of Palestinians in Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria. And if you let them go broke, you will not have the critical thing you need to get aid in. So we believe that is a very dramatic measure and should be avoided. And then in parallel, one should do every investigations possible, and if there are people who are involved in this, they should be treated accordingly. But just cutting down the whole thing, I think, is just a recipe for punishing all Palestinians and leaving them in a more terrible situation. Not good for anybody's security, not least Palestinians, of course, but not in the security interest of Israel either.
Mr. Prime Minister, I want to thank you very much for appearing here on the France 24 interview, and thank you all for watching this show.